Trump is managing the markets. That's what this 90-day pause is. But the thing that is very concerning is how he's managing this. So Scott Bessent, Howard Lutnick, these are his Treasury and Commerce secretaries, Trump's. They sat down when Trump saw the bond market crashing, and they're like, oh, we need to manage this, so let's do the 90-day pause. The way that they did the 90-day pause was to craft a Truth Social tweet blame shifting China for all of this, right? And Stephen Miller, the White House advisor, who's also fucking like avowed racist, like he was on the Sunday shows and he was also pinning all of this on China ultimately, even before this new pivot from Trump.
China has built its entire industrial strategy since its entrance into the World Trade Organization on being able to sell highly subsidized, currency-manipulated, dumped goods into U.S. markets. It is an industrial strategy from China to product dump strategically to take out American steel, to take out American aluminum, to take out core American defense industries and defense needs so that we're reliant on China.
So China was going to be the target from the start, disproportionately of the global tariff regime. That's why they had 54% tariffs, right? Where most countries got only 10%. And the Truth Social post is just dripping with vitriol saying China's screwing us, China's a threat, and this is dealing with it's the national securitization of the tariffs, which is that's nothing new. But Lutnick said that Lutnick, Scott Bessent, and Trump sat together and crafted that Trump Truth Social tweet. So the anti-China pivot was a bit of an improvisation, it sounds like, but it was an improvisation that they sort of crafted strategically together on the spot. It's Trump's words, I guess. But the idea is that like they are trying to say that the world can get a deal and get their individual countries' tariffs relieved if they help expunge China from the global economy, if they can help the American primacy project of kneecapping China, right? This is the bargain that's on the table right now. And this is not going to work. America doesn't have the cards to be doing what it's doing on economic policy, on economic statecraft, especially on Asia, especially relative to China, you know? So like Adam Posen had a piece in Foreign Affairs where he basically made this same argument. I've been arguing this for years, but it's like America doesn't have the cards to do what it's trying to do, you know? And there's going to be a cost of that. The US market makes up 15% of Chinese exports. That's if China lost that access to the US completely, it would still be a powerhouse. That would be a decline in growth rates, of course, but it's manageable. And it becomes more manageable as China and other countries diversify away from the United States. And that's the big trend that seems to kind of be happening. So in the Biden years and in Trump 1.0 years, there was a lot of talk about economic diversification as the subtext being like diversification away from China. And that's not the diversification anymore that is the priority. The priority is to diversify away from the US. So like on the one hand, you could issue retaliatory tariffs, and like Singapore's prime minister said like they're not going to, and he gave a very good set of sober comments.
The US is doing now is not reform. It is rejecting the very system it created.
Singapore depends on a kind of open international order. If it started imposing retaliatory tariffs against Trump, it would disavow the order that they need in order to exist and thrive. So they're not going to issue retaliatory tariffs. But what they are going to do is seek out new trading partners, new forms of financial architecture and economic architecture. And so you're going to see new pushes for FTAs, new supply chains, new economic partnerships that route around the US, the search for new markets. And so China, Japan, South Korea, not friends.
China, Japan, and South Korea held the first trade talks in 5 years on Sunday. amid concerns over US President Donald Trump's import tariffs. The three Asian manufacturing giants agreed to, quote, closely cooperate for a comprehensive and high-level talks to improve free trade in the region. That's according to a statement released after the meeting. Trade ministers from the three nations met ahead of Trump's planned announcement on Wednesday of more tariffs in what he calls, quote, Liberation Day.
To coordinate the response to Trump's tariffs, which itself is kind of a signal, but the bigger signal is that those three countries, again, not friends, they are pushing forward with trying to conclude an FTA, a free trade agreement. That would be a major accomplishment, but also a major symbol of a kind of international order that is moving on past the U.S., you know? And this is all being driven, mind you, by America's commitment to primacy in the form of Trump's tariffs. But the fact that like only 15% of China's exports go to the U.S. not only means that it's manageable, but like in the Sino-U.S. partnership generally, China gets money from the U.S. Money is fungible. Money is replaceable. America gets goods and services from China that it does not get elsewhere, that it does not make itself. You know, one of many examples is the critical minerals inputs to U.S. weapons, right? A lot of U.S. missiles and aircraft rely on parts and materials from China, sourced from China, right? And so like even the American warfighting apparatus, to say nothing of like vacuum cleaners and televisions and shit, involves China, requires China. Produces stuff that China produces stuff that America uses and needs, but America doesn't produce stuff that China needs, right? So there is an imbalance, and what this means is that there's like a cost exchange ratio in economic warfare that favors China and that harms the US. So the more the US escalates the economic war with China, the more it hurts America more than China. So the longer it goes on and the more it escalates, the more of a disadvantage America has. And that's separate from the question of global economic ordering and how other states are going to respond, given that everybody sees America as a revisionist power. And that's not only accurate, but like Singapore's prime minister has actively been saying that, right? Which is, again, brave new world shit. Like, people were not talking like this until recently. Like, you couldn't have imagined this a couple years ago, you know? So the thing that concerns me right now is, like, you know, you go back to 1930, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act in the U.S., that they threw up these protective tariff barriers, and Imperial Japan looked at that and got freaked out because it was an export-based economy. Imperial Japan was, right? The Smoot-Hawley tariffs accelerated an arms race in global tariffs in the 1930s. Not only did that worsen the Great Depression, but Imperial Japan saw that, and their solution was more empire, basically. Like, they needed to become autarkic. And so part of that was the conquest of not just Korea, but China, right? And the larger Southeast Asia and the Pacific. And so we get the Pacific War. So like World War II is downstream of a global protectionist mood, the tariff barriers. I'm not saying tariffs caused World War II, but it's like a huge part of the story, you know? And so in the context of Sino-US relations today, this is something that is like actively on my mind. I think the MAGA project, and I've said this and we argued this in the Rivalry Peril in a certain way, the MAGA project, it needs perpetual crisis with an external great power. You need like ethno-nationalism, the consolidation of a national bloc, especially an ethno-nationalist bloc. It requires an enemy to fuse it. And geopolitical rivalry has this tendency to increase the strength of reactionary political demagogues. It's a very easy thing to demagogue. It justifies austerity and diverting social spending into military spending and all of that, right? The Defense Department is still, it's going to be getting, Trump is promoting a $1 trillion budget for the military now, right? That $1 trillion budget is not to fight cartels. It's not about fentanyl. You don't need F-22s and Boeing's latest 6th generation fighter. You don't need that stuff to fight cartels. You need that stuff to fight a great power enemy. Who's the only game in town for high-tech war fighting? It's China. And that's why you see the Silicon Valley defense industrial bros, the Palantir executives, these guys, they are actively talking about us being in war with China already. China's going to war with us already.
But I think one of the things, China knows they're at war. The question is, we kind of equivocate on it as a peace-loving nation.
They have insane threat inflation. They have an insane misperception of China, right? And the China threat. But that's because it fuels their bottom line. And that's what the China hawks in the Trump administration, to a man, they all want. They want to optimize for war with China, and they need to build that military. And you can't do that in a benign strategic environment, And Bridge Colby, who I talked about on the pod occasionally, he calls this, he wants an anti-hegemonic coalition in Asia, or counter-hegemonic coalition in Asia. That's a misnomer. That's the wrong term for it. But he wants to unify smaller countries in Asia. He wants to unify the American public behind this anti-China project. That facilitates the white nationalist social order. And it's not going to happen. You can't have that kind of counter-hegemonic coalition in a world where we're alienating everybody. That's fucking impossible. But that's what they want. And so these guys are on wax. They're on the record. They've been writing in foreign affairs and stuff for years. They want a hard break. Trump's China people. They want a hard break from China. They are goading China. They're trying to entice China into escalating, into reactions that they can use to demagogue, to continue consolidating this sort of national security ethno-nationalist project, to continue feeding the venture capital machine, which is only plowing money into defense and AI and basically nothing else. So they need this war with China shit. And that's the world that we're sort of living in and headed toward, right? So they need Christ. No, I don't think anybody wants World War III, but they're trying to be too clever by half. They want the crisis, and they want to live in the crisis with China. They want geopolitical confrontation. And Trump's tariffs on China are not going away anytime soon. They're or at all. I think they're here to stay, right? And his China hawks love it because they want a hard break from China. I guess to sum things up, tariffs are here to stay on China. They are going to escalate geopolitical tension with China. They're trying to be used to extort friendly countries to work with us to purge China basically from the global economy. And that bet is going to fail spectacularly